The storm and the sacrifice. The storm that night was unlike any the city had seen in years. Rain pounded against the hospital windows with unrelenting fury, streaks of water racing down the glass like rivers desperate to escape. Lightning cracked the sky open every few minutes, spilling bright flashes into the emergency ward, and thunder rolled so deep it shook the floor beneath the nurses' tired feet. Power flickered once, twice before the backup generators roared awake, bathing the sterile halls in a pale yellow glow. Inside, the air was tense, heavy, and frantic. Nancy Carter, a nurse in her late 20s, leaned against the counter at the nurses' station just for a second. Her scrubs were damp at the shoulders from rushing through the rain earlier that evening, and her bun had already started to unravel, strands of blonde hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Her blue eyes, though ringed with exhaustion, carried a calm focus that had kept her moving through 12 hours of emergencies already. She had worked 2 consecutive shifts without real rest, and her legs trembled beneath her. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. Nancy, Trauma 1, now. Dr. Harris's sharp voice cut through the storm outside and the chaos inside. His glasses were fogged, his lab coat spattered with rain. His tone wasn't harsh, only urgent. Nancy pushed away from the counter, her body reacting before her brain could remind her how tired she was. She sprinted down the corridor, her sneakers squeaking on the wet linoleum. As she reached the trauma bay, she pulled gloves from the box by the door, snapping them on just as the paramedics burst in with a stretcher. Male, mid-40s, found unconscious at a car crash on I-7, one paramedic reported over the roar of the storm. Blunt trauma, internal bleeding suspected, BP's dropping fast, he's fading. Nancy rushed to the patient's side, his fake. He was pale beneath streaks of blood, his dark hair matted to his forehead. His chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath a battle. She glanced at the monitor, his vitals were crashing. Name? She asked, her voice steady even though her heart raced. No ID yet, the paramedic said, breathless. Car was totaled. He was alone. Dr. Harris leaned over the patient. We need blood type AB negative, stat. The blood bank nurse, pale and anxious, shook her head. We're out. The last unit went to the maternity emergency an hour ago. Nancy froze for half a second. AB negative, one of the rarest blood types in the world. Only 1% of the population had it. She swallowed hard, then whispered, I'm AB negative. Dr. Harris turned to her sharply. Nancy, you just came off a 36-hour shift. You can barely stand. She lifted her chin. And he's about to die. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the storm and the machine's beeping warnings. Dr. Harris hesitated, his eyes softening with worry. Are you sure? Yes. Her voice was firm, unwavering. Prep me. Now. Within minutes, Nancy was seated in the adjacent room, her arm outstretched as a nurse swabbed her skin and inserted the needle. Blood began to flow into the collection bag, red against the sterile white. Nancy felt the sting, then the weakness creeping into her limbs, but she kept her eyes on the patient through the glass wall. His chest struggled to rise, his lips turning blue. Hang the blood, Dr. Harris barked. The team moved quickly, connecting the bag of Nancy's blood into the patient's line. Drop by drop, her lifeblood entered his veins, fighting against the darkness threatening to take him. Nancy closed her eyes briefly, her body swaying with fatigue. Memories flickered in her mind, her mother at home lying weak in bed, bills stacked on the kitchen counter, the promise she had made to herself years ago never to give up no matter how hard life became. This man was a stranger, but she couldn't let him die, not if she could help. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The monitors beeped steadily now, his vitals climbing, his breathing growing stronger. The gray pallor of his skin began to fade, replaced by a faint flush. Relief rippled through the trauma team. Dr. Harris exhaled, pulling off his gloves. He's stabilizing. He's going to make it. Nancy slumped back in her chair, dizzy but smiling faintly. Her vision blurred at the edges, but her heart steadied. She had done her duty, not just as a nurse, but as a human being. The man on the stretcher, unaware of the sacrifice made for him, was wheeled away to intensive care. His file would later reveal his identity. Ethan Ward, one of the city's most powerful and enigmatic CEOs. a man known for building an empire of innovation, for being ruthless in the boardroom, and for raising a daughter alone after losing his wife years earlier. But Nancy didn't know any of that yet. To her, he was just another patient, another soul pulled back from the brink. As she staggered back to her feet, Dr. Harris caught her arm gently. "You've given enough tonight, Nancy. Go home. Rest." She nodded faintly, though she knew sleep wouldn't come easy. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside, life had been saved. She gathered her things slowly, unaware that this night, the night she gave her blood to a stranger, was the beginning of a story that would change everything she thought she knew about her future. Because Ethan Ward would not forget, and soon he would come looking for her. The hidden truth. Morning came with a softer sky, though the storm's memory lingered in the wet streets and broken branches scattered along the sidewalks. Inside her tiny one-bedroom apartment, Nancy Carter sat at the kitchen table with her head resting on her folded arms. She hadn't meant to fall asleep there, but exhaustion had claimed her the moment she had walked through the door. The sound of her mother coughing from the next room pulled her awake, reminding her that rest was a luxury she rarely had. With stiff movements, Nancy stood, brushed her hair from her face, and moved to prepare tea and medicine before tending to her mother. Her mother, once full of strength and laughter, was now frail, her body weakened by illness that demanded constant care and expensive treatments. Nancy balanced a tray with warm tea, toast, and pills, carrying it into the dimly lit room where her mother lay propped against pillows. "Good morning, Mom," she said softly, forcing cheer into her voice. "How are you feeling today?" Her mother gave her a tired smile. "Better now that you're here. But you look like you've been through a war." Nancy laughed lightly, though the sound was edged with fatigue. It was just another shift. She didn't mention the man who had nearly died in her hands, or how her own blood had flowed into him to give him another chance at life. To her, it was part of her calling. Nurses gave, even when they had nothing left to give. "Exactly like that," Ethan said, his voice low. "She's the reason I'm here right now, holding your hand." Lily grew quiet, her small fingers still wrapped around his. In her heart, she made a silent promise. She would meet this nurse, this stranger who had saved her father. Because in that moment, Nancy Carter became more than a name. She became part of their family's story. Back in her apartment, Nancy thought little of it. She never sought recognition. To her, the man had been just another patient among hundreds she had treated, another soul she had fought to keep tethered to life. What she didn't realize was that this patient was not just anyone. Ethan Ward was a name whispered in boardrooms and business journals, a man both admired and criticized for his relentless drive. Yet beneath the reputation was a father, a widower, and now a man indebted to a nurse who had given him the rarest gift, another chance. When Ethan was discharged days later, his first request wasn't about meetings or company updates. It was about finding her. He asked the hospital staff again and again until someone finally gave him her address. "Why do you want to know about her?" Dr. Harris asked, skeptical. "Because she gave me more than blood," Ethan said quietly. "She gave me my life back, and I intend to thank her properly." And with that, Ethan Ward, a man who never owed anyone anything, set his sights on Nancy Carter, the nurse who had saved him in the storm. He didn't know yet how deeply their lives would intertwine, or how his daughter's laughter would one day echo in Nancy's small apartment. He only knew that gratitude demanded action. For Nancy, the days ahead would bring a knock on her door that would change everything. Nancy had just set down her bag and started preparing soup when a knock sounded at the door. It was unusual. Few people ever visited. Her heart skipped once, as she wiped her hands and went to answer. When she opened it, she froze. Standing there was a man in a dark tailored suit, his posture straight and confident, though his face carried the paleness of recent illness. His dark hair was neatly combed, his sharp eyes softened only slightly by the faint trace of a healing scar near his temple. "Miss Carter?" His voice was deep, steady, yet gentle enough not to startle. Nancy blinked, stunned. "Yes? Can I help you?" He smiled faintly, though it seemed out of place on a man so serious. "I'm Ethan Ward. The man you saved at the hospital last week. Her hand tightened slightly on the door frame, her mind racing. She had known he was just another patient, another life clinging to the edge. She hadn't cared about his name or title. Now, standing before her, he didn't look like a man who owned skyscrapers or commanded boardrooms. He looked like someone who had walked out of death's shadow carrying gratitude heavier than any wealth. I was just doing my job, Nancy said quietly, her instinct to deflect praise stronger than her curiosity. Ethan shook his head. No. You gave more than your job required. You gave your blood. That's not duty, that's sacrifice. And I'm not here to let that go unspoken. Before she could answer, a small figure stepped from behind him, a girl with dark hair in a braid, her large brown eyes filled with curiosity and shyness. She clutched a small bouquet of flowers, their stems wrapped in paper, slightly uneven as though chosen with care rather than formality. This is my daughter, Lily, Ethan said softly, glancing at her. She insisted on coming. Lily stepped forward, holding the flowers out with small, trembling hands. These are for you, she whispered. Thank you for saving my daddy. She looked away, her heart caught between gratitude and resistance. The world she lived in had taught her not to expect miracles, not to lean on promises. Yet here was a man who could command anything with wealth and power, sitting humbly in her small apartment, asking for nothing but the chance to honor what she had done. When Ethan finally stood, he didn't press further. Instead, he left her with words that lingered long after he and Lily walked out the door. I'll respect your pride, Miss Carter, he said gently. But don't mistake me for someone who forgets. This isn't the end. I'll find a way, not to repay you, but to make sure you understand what you've given me. As the door closed softly behind them, Nancy sank into her chair, the flowers still cradled in her hands. The apartment felt quieter than before, yet her heart beat faster, as though the storm outside had only moved within her. She had no idea what kind of path had just been set in motion, but she knew one thing with certainty. Her life, carefully built on sacrifice and routine, was no longer the same. Because Ethan Ward had stepped into it, and he wasn't a man who let things go. The proposal that changes everything. For the next few days, Nancy Carter tried to return to normal. She went back to the hospital, pulled her shifts, and came home to her small apartment where her mother rested quietly in bed. She cooked meals, paid what bills she could, and filled her nights with exhaustion so deep that her body ached constantly. On the surface, everything seemed the same, but inside, she was restless. The memory of Ethan Ward standing in her doorway lingered, his voice, his daughter's shy smile, the bouquet of flowers sitting in a small vase on the kitchen table. All of it reminded her that her act of sacrifice had reached further than she had intended. She told herself he would forget. Men like him, we assess at time, wealthy and powerful, lived in fast-moving worlds. They might feel gratitude for a moment, but then life swept them back into boardrooms and deals, into wealth that shielded them from remembering the struggles of ordinary people. She wanted it that way. She had never liked being in the spotlight. What she had done was nothing more than what her conscience demanded. But Ethan didn't forget. On a quiet Saturday morning, when the city was still shaking off sleep, Nancy heard another knock at her door. She hesitated, her pulse quickening. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and visitors were rare. Opening the door slowly, she found Ethan again, this time dressed not in a suit but in a simple dark sweater and slacks. His appearance was less intimidating, though his presence still carried a quiet authority. Beside him stood Lily, holding a worn leather book to her chest like a treasure. I hope this isn't a bad time, Ethan said, his tone careful, almost respectful. Nancy frowned slightly, though her voice was polite. It's early. What brings you here again? Ethan glanced at Lily, then back at Nancy. Something important, but it's not about me, it's about her. He placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. Nancy stepped aside reluctantly, motioning for them to enter. Ethan and Lily sat on the small sofa while Nancy remained standing, arms crossed loosely, as though bracing herself. Lily clutched the leather book tighter, her eyes darting nervously between her father and Nancy. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I'm going to be direct, Miss Carter. My daughter has been struggling for a long time. Losing her mother at such a young age left her quiet, withdrawn, and often lonely. I've done everything I can, hired tutors, therapists, even counselors, but nothing has helped her open up. Nothing has made her smile the way she did the day she met you. Nancy blinked, caught off guard. Me? I only spoke to her for a moment. That moment mattered, Ethan said firmly. His eyes held hers, steady and unflinching. She talked about you for days afterward. She called you the brave nurse who gave her daddy life. That's not something I can ignore. Nancy's gaze softened as she looked at Lily, who ducked her head shyly but nodded. It's true, the little girl whispered. You're different. You didn't look at me like everyone else does. You just talked to me, like I was normal. Those words hit Nancy with a quiet ache. She understood loneliness. She had grown up watching her own mother work endless hours to keep food on the table, always on the edge of exhaustion, always treated differently because they were poor. She knew what it felt like to want someone to simply see you as you were, not as a problem to be fixed. Ethan continued, his voice lower now, carrying an edge of vulnerability that seemed rare for a man of his stature. I'm not asking for charity. I'm offering something. I want you to consider becoming part of Lily's world, not as a nurse, not as a tutor, but as someone she can trust, someone who can be here for her in ways I can't always manage, not because I don't care, but because my responsibilities often pull me away. Nancy's heart raced. She shook her head slightly. Mr. Ward, I'm a nurse, not a governess. I have my job, my mother to take care of, my life. I can't just... I know, Ethan interrupted gently. I know. Your life is full, and I respect that. But hear me out. I'm not asking you to leave your career. I'm asking you to give Lily a few hours, a few days a week. Come to the house, spend time with her, help her with the little things, read with her, talk with her, just be a presence she can lean on. In return, I'll make sure your schedule is accommodated and I'll provide financial support, not as charity, but as payment for your time. A fair arrangement. The word support made Nancy bristle. She hated the idea of being bought, of her kindness being turned into a transaction. Her pride rose like a shield. I don't want your money. Ethan's expression hardened for a moment, then softened again. This isn't about money. It's about opportunity. For her. For you. Your mother deserves better care than what you've been able to afford. I know because I've seen the weight on your shoulders. You shouldn't have to carry it all alone. This isn't me trying to erase your pride. It's me trying to make sure the woman who saved my life doesn't drown under the burden she's been forced to carry. The room fell silent. Nancy's hands trembled slightly at her sides, her mind torn between refusal and the undeniable truth of his words. She thought of the stack of bills on her table, of the medicine her mother sometimes skipped because it was too expensive, of the exhaustion that lived in her bones every day. And she thought of Lily, sitting quietly on the sofa, looking at her with eyes that held hope. I don't know if I can, Nancy said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I belong in your world. Ethan stood slowly, his tall frame commanding but not imposing. You don't have to belong to my world, Nancy. You just have to belong to hers. He glanced at Lily, who hugged the book tighter, her gaze never leaving Nancy's face. She needs you, more than you realize. For a long moment, Nancy said nothing. She looked at the flowers still blooming faintly in the vase on her table, at her mother's closed door, at Lily's hopeful face, and at Ethan's unwavering eyes. Finally, she exhaled. I'll try, but only for her. Ethan's lips curved into the faintest smile, one that carried relief rather than triumph. That's all I could ask. As he and Lily left, the promise of something new hung in the air. Nancy stood in the doorway long after they disappeared down the hallway, her heart unsettled. She had agreed to step into a world she didn't understand, for a girl who saw her as more than a nurse, more than a stranger. It terrified her, but it also stirred something she hadn't felt in years, possibility. She didn't know it yet, but this choice would not only change Lily's life, it would change her own in ways she could never have imagined. A new world. Nancy Carter's life had always been framed by the quiet walls of her small apartment and the relentless halls of the hospital. The days were long, the nights longer, and every week seemed like an endless loop of duty and sacrifice. Yet, when she agreed to Ethan Ward's proposal, she stepped into a world so different from her own that it almost felt like stepping onto another planet. The first time she arrived at the Ward estate, she stopped at the gates, stunned by the sight before her. The house wasn't just a home. It was an estate, a mansion of glass and stone surrounded by lush gardens, tall iron gates and security cameras that seemed to follow every movement. Her taxi driver whistled under his breath. "Someone important lives here." Nancy simply nodded, clutching her small bag tighter. She had tried to prepare herself mentally, but seeing the sheer size of the property left her uneasy. The driver pulled away, leaving her standing alone at the gate until a guard approached, confirmed her name, and buzzed her in. The gravel path stretched before her like a carpet of wealth, leading to tall double doors that stood like guardians of another world. When the door opened, Lily was the first to appear. The little girl's face lit up instantly when she saw Nancy, and she ran forward, wrapping her small arms around Nancy's waist. "You came," she said, her voice carrying the kind of joy that made Nancy's heart ache. Nancy smiled, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "Of course I came. I promised, didn't I?" Behind Lily, Ethan appeared, dressed in a simple button-down shirt and slacks. He wasn't in his usual suit, but even dressed casually, he carried himself with an authority that filled the space around him. "Welcome, Nancy," he said with quiet warmth. "I'm glad you're here." Stepping inside, Nancy was overwhelmed by the size and beauty of the home. The ceiling stretched high above her, chandeliers glittering like constellations. Expensive art lined the walls, and the floors gleamed so brightly they reflected her shoes. Every detail spoke of wealth, wealth she could never imagine belonging to. She felt out of place instantly, like a stranger walking into a palace. But then Lily grabbed her hand and tugged her down the hall. "Come see my room." Lily's room was no ordinary child's room. It was vast, filled with shelves of books, toys neatly arranged, and large windows that overlooked the gardens. Yet despite all the luxury, there was something missing. Nancy noticed it right away. The toys looked untouched, the books lined up too neatly, and the walls were bare of the kind of messy joy that came from a child who felt truly free. "You have a lot of things," Nancy said softly. "But do you play with them?" Lily shrugged, her little shoulders lifting almost sadly. "Not really. Daddy's busy, and the nannies never stay long. They don't understand." Nancy knelt, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "Well, I'm here now. So what do you want to do?" Breaking barriers. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm Nancy had never expected to experience. Her life was still split in two worlds: the harsh, fluorescent-lit corridors of the hospital where she stitched wounds and calmed the dying, and the grand, echoing halls of Ethan Ward's estate where a little girl's laughter had begun to bloom like a fragile flower in spring. Each time she crossed through the Ward gates, Nancy felt a wave of unease, part humility, part disbelief that she, a nurse who often struggled to pay electricity bills, was walking into marble-floored halls and sitting at tables where crystal glasses glittered beneath chandeliers. And yet, as the days unfolded, she began to realize that behind all the wealth and grandeur, the heart of the Ward household was not in its riches, but in the people, specifically in Lily, whose quiet world was slowly expanding, and in Ethan, whose carefully controlled life was quietly unraveling in the presence of someone who dared to see through the layers of power and reputation. Nancy quickly discovered that Ethan was not just a man of business headlines and boardroom victories. Beneath the sharp exterior was a father trying desperately to balance two worlds, the relentless pull of his empire and the fragile needs of his daughter. He was often on phone calls at odd hours, his brow furrowed with tension as he navigated crises that could topple companies. Yet Nancy noticed something. Each time Lily tugged on his sleeve, no matter how urgent the call, Ethan's expression softened. He would kneel down, listen to her, and then excuse himself from his empire for a moment just to answer a child's question about a storybook or a flower in the garden. It was those moments that broke the image of the untouchable CEO and revealed the man beneath, the father who feared failing the only family he had left. Still, the household was free of judgment. Nancy began to feel the sharp gazes of staff members who whispered in corners. Some were polite, others were cold, but their eyes often carried the same unspoken thought. She doesn't belong here. At first, Nancy ignored it, but one evening, as she was helping Lily with homework at the kitchen table, she overheard two of the maids speaking near the doorway. Their voices were low, but the words carried. "She's just a nurse," one whispered. "How long do you think she'll last before she realizes she's out of place?" "She won't last," the other replied. "Women like her don't belong in a house like this. Mr. Ward will tire of her presence." The words struck Nancy like shards of glass. She kept her face calm for Lily's sake, but her heart sank. That night, as she rode the bus home, she pressed her forehead against the cold window and fought the sting of tears. She had agreed to help Lily, nothing more, but already the weight of judgment was pressing down on her shoulders. She wondered if she had made a mistake stepping into this world. But the very next day, life reminded her why she had agreed in the first place. Lily had always been afraid of water. The swimming pool in the estate's garden was beautiful, but Lily had never stepped near it, scarred by a memory of nearly drowning at a friend's party years ago. Tutors had tried, even therapists, but the fear had grown stronger. That afternoon, while Nancy and Lily were walking near the pool, Nancy crouched beside her, speaking softly. "Do you know what fear really is, Lily?" Nancy asked gently. The girl shook her head, her eyes fixed on the shimmering water. "Fear is just your mind trying to tell you a story," Nancy continued. "Sometimes it's true, but most of the time, it's not. The water isn't your enemy. It doesn't want to hurt you. It just wants you to learn to move with it." Lily bit her lip. "But what if I sink?" Nancy reached for her hand. "Then I'll be there, and we'll rise together." For a long moment, Lily stared at her, torn between fear and trust. Finally, with trembling steps, she allowed Nancy to guide her to the edge of the pool. Slowly, carefully, Nancy stepped in first, the cool water rising around her legs. She extended her arms. "Come on, just one step. You don't have to swim, just feel the water with me." With wide eyes, Lily stepped closer, clutching Nancy's hand like a lifeline. Together they eased into the shallow water, and when Lily gasped, Nancy held her steady. "You're safe. I've got you." Minutes turned into half an hour, and for the first time in years, Lily didn't scream or cry near water. Instead, she clung to Nancy and whispered, "I'm not afraid with you here." That night, when Ethan came home and found his daughter beaming with pride, telling him how she had finally touched the water without panic, he turned to Nancy with a look she couldn't quite decipher. It was gratitude, yes, but it was also something deeper, something unspoken that made her heart quicken. Later, when Lily was asleep, Ethan asked Nancy to join him on the terrace. The city lights stretched in the distance, and the night air carried the scent of blooming jasmine. He stood silently for a moment, his hands resting on the railing, his profile etched against the glow of the city. Finally, he spoke. "Do you have any idea what you've done for her?" he asked quietly. Nancy folded her arms, uncertain. "I only helped her take one step." "One step," Ethan said, turning to face her, "that no one else has been able to make her take in years. You've given her something I couldn't, something money couldn't buy." Nancy looked away, her throat tight. "She just needed someone to believe in her." "And she needed you," Ethan replied firmly. His voice softened, almost vulnerable. "I don't know how to explain it, Nancy, but since you walked into her life, everything feels different. The house feels alive again. She smiles more. And—" He paused, his gaze lingering on her. "So do I." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with words neither dared to speak. Nancy's heart pounded in her chest, but she reminded herself of the line she had drawn. She was here for Lily, not for him. Yet as she looked into his eyes, she couldn't deny the truth building quietly between them. Something was changing. The barriers that had once separated their worlds, the distance of wealth, status, and pride, were beginning to crack. And in those cracks, something fragile but undeniable was taking root. The life-changing decision. The seasons shifted quietly as Nancy's presence in the Ward household became something no one could overlook. What had started as an agreement of a few hours a week gradually grew into something deeper, more permanent. Lily no longer clung to silence or shadows. She was laughing freely, drawing pictures, running barefoot through the gardens, and even daring to step into the pool with cautious joy. She had begun to live again, and anyone who watched could see the difference. Yet it wasn't only Lily who was changing. Ethan Ward, the man known for building companies and commanding boardrooms, had begun to soften. His once cold, precise routines had started to bend. Meetings were delayed or rescheduled so he could sit at the dinner table with his daughter and Nancy. Nights once reserved for late hours in his study were now filled with quiet moments by the fire, listening to Lily's stories or Nancy's gentle laughter. The man who had built walls of stone around his heart was beginning to let someone inside, though he himself hardly recognized it at first. Still, the outside world noticed. Newspapers whispered about the mysterious nurse who was often seen entering and leaving the Ward estate. Gossip swirled in business circles, questioning who she was and what role she played in Ethan's carefully controlled life. But inside the estate, the only truth that mattered was that a father and daughter had found hope again in the presence of a woman who had given more of herself than she ever thought she could. It all came to a head one evening when Ethan asked Nancy and her mother to accompany him and Lily to a company gala. At first, Nancy refused. She had no gowns, no jewels, no experience standing under the lights of such wealth. But Ethan had insisted with quiet determination. "You belong by our side," he had said. "Not because of status, but because you're part of this family now, whether you realize it or not." The night of the gala was one Nancy would never forget. She wore a simple, elegant dress Ethan had arranged discreetly, refusing to let her feel out of place. Her mother, though frail, joined proudly, her eyes shining with a pride Nancy hadn't seen in years. When they entered the ballroom, whispers followed them, but Nancy held her head high. Lily clung to her hand, her eyes filled with trust, and Ethan walked beside them with an expression that silenced anyone who dared to question their presence. During the evening, when the speeches began, Ethan stepped onto the stage. He was expected to talk about profits, new ventures, and company growth. Instead, he paused, his gaze searching the crowd until it landed on Nancy. The room fell into a hush as his voice carried with quiet conviction. "Success," he began, "is often measured by wealth, power, and influence, but tonight I want to talk about something greater. Life is not built on numbers alone. It is built on sacrifice, on compassion, and on the people who remain. In us, what truly matters." Months ago, I was lying on an operating table, one breath away from death. I am standing here today because of a woman who gave not just her skill, but her very lifeblood to save a stranger. That woman is Nancy Carter. All eyes turned to her. Nancy froze, her cheeks flushing as murmurs rippled through the room. Ethan continued, his voice strong but filled with emotion. "She saved me, but she gave my daughter something even greater. She gave her back her laughter, her courage, her ability to dream again. No wealth of mine could ever repay that. What Nancy Carter has brought into our lives is beyond gratitude. It is life itself." The applause was thunderous, but Nancy hardly heard it. Her eyes were locked on Ethan, whose gaze never wavered. Then, in a moment that silenced even the loudest whispers, Ethan stepped down from the stage and walked straight to her. The crowd parted as he reached her, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He took her hand in his voice low, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Nancy, I don't want to thank you with words or with wealth. I want to thank you with a promise. You've already given us your heart in ways you may not realize. I want to give you mine, not as a debt repaid, but as love freely given. Will you stand with me, not as a nurse, not as a guest in this house, but as part of this family, forever?" Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Nancy's mother pressed a trembling hand to her lips, her eyes shining with tears. Lily squeezed Nancy's other hand tightly, whispering, "Say yes. Please, say yes." Nancy's heart pounded in her chest. For so long, her life had been defined by survival, by sacrifice, by carrying burdens alone. She had never dreamed of such a moment, never believed it could happen to someone like her. Yet, standing there with Ethan's hand in hers and Lily's voice in her ear, she realized something. This wasn't charity, and it wasn't pity.